Cool. All right, we'll kick it off with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Baltimore Comic-Con 2019, an hour with Garth Ennis. Please give a round of applause and let everybody know they're here. Is that one working? I'm going to be fair, I mic checked the other ones. Son of a bitch. Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so career that starts out meeting with a fellow that ran a comic shop in Ireland, and you self-published Troubles and From Their True Faith in 2000 AD. After 2000 AD, you're picked up by DC and do Hellblazer, and then from there, Part on the Demon, where you create the greatest character ever, but we're not here to talk about him. Picked up by Vertigo to do Preacher with the great Steve Dillon. From there, Hitman, as well as once Hitman is done and Preacher's done, picked up by Marvel to un-F the Punisher. 9/11 happens and decides to tell more than just Looney Tunes style story and tell the real deal Punisher that kickstarts the Max line, which brings not only the character, but I would argue the company back from bankruptcy and back to relevancy. Picked up by Wildstorm for a comic that's way too on the nose, making fun of their stars, so you're eventually picked up by Dynamite for the Boys, which it was 7 years of stories in a 6-year time frame. With that success with Battlefields, knowing that you are a license to print money, they gave you the opportunity to tell what you really love to talk about, which is war. I'm putting words in your mouth, I'm sorry. I'm excited, I'm nervous, but at the same time, the Battlefield story.
Right.
And with that as well, Avatar grabs you at that point for Crossed, Stitched. I think I'm missing something. Trifecta.
No, you keep going, because in another 2 seconds we can all go home. No, you're more or less right. Let's see, John and I did not self-publish Troubled Souls. What happened was, and with all this 30 years in comics stuff, I've been thinking about this. This month, it's 31 years to the month since I went to college. Was having a shitty time, not a spectacularly shitty time, I just realized it had been a mistake. And there was, you probably heard of 2000 AD, well they had a sister publication called Crisis, which was a political comic. They had a signing tour and it came to Belfast, and I met a number of writers and artists, and I also met the editor, Steve McManus, and I said, would you be interested in a story about the Northern Ireland Troubles by someone who lives here? And he said, that's exactly the kind of thing we'd like to do. Wow. Sent the idea in, and then on January the 16th, 1989,
happy birthday.
I called them up, just took a punt on it, you never know, and expecting the answer, yeah, right, kid, we'll get back to you. And I said, it was like, oh yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that. And that was where it began.
You were 19.
It was my 19th birthday.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I do remember this sort of palpable sense of my life being about to change. Like, get this right, and all your dreams will come true, except the ones you can't possibly talk about. But you will, you get this right, and this is it. This is what you want. They picked up Troubled Souls. They published True Faith. That led to work for 2000 AD, Judge Dredd and so on. It also led to Hellblazer. I happened to be writing Hellblazer when Vertigo started, so 1 month we were DC, the next month we were DC Vertigo.
Oh wow.
And I think it was about halfway through the run. It was right after Steve came on as regular artist. They then said, whatever you guys want to do next, we'll take. That turned out to be Preacher.
Oh yes.
That kind of made it, got us both a bit further up the ladder. And then we met Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, and they got us on with Punisher. And the rest is history, really. I think I did start with Avatar a little earlier than you thought. I think it would have been about 03 or 04 when they picked up Dix, which was, I know, Detectives.
The Troubled Soul, the Detectives.
Yeah, it actually has its roots right back in that first thing, Troubled Souls, but Avatar picked that up, and then I started doing new material for them, like 303, Wormwood.
Oh, right.
That
Chronicles of Wormwood.
Yeah, that eventually led to Crossed. The Boys happened exactly as you said. We started at DC Wildstorm, and we ended up with Dynamite, which is one of the best moves I've ever made. And that, yeah, the rest up to the present day is pretty much as you put it.
That's outstanding. With the The intent was, with your last panel having been here in 2012, to try and stick to the more recent stuff, but of course,
Sure,
if there's
sure.
anything that you feel like talking about,
Or anything anyone wants to know about, sure.
by all means.
Yeah.
A lot of trying to get up, so again, with me, I travel for work, so I'm not at home with all of my books, so I have tried to catch up on all the war stuff that you've been writing as of late. And I did have a lot of questions that I figured would try and stick in that genre, because you, more than anybody else that I've really noticed in the last 15 years, especially with American comics, have been pushing historical fiction.
Right.
And Patrice wanted me to ask, and I'm going to kick this off with it, what inspires, what drives you to write about that? Because it's awesome, you're a natural fit for it. It needs to have a broader audience, it needs to be a lot more, but what drives you?
I think it began reading British war comics as a kid. This is one of those quirks of fate. Because of where I lived in Northern Ireland, which is a small town outside of Belfast, the distribution of American comics and their British reprints was extremely limited. Now, John McCrea, on the other hand, he grew up in Belfast and he was able to amass a decent enough collection of American comics because the distribution was a little bit better. All I got were the British newsstand titles. Again, 2000 AD, another anthology weekly called Battle.
He mentioned Cerebus.
He mentioned
Cerebus?
Cerebus. Yeah, you see, I would never have seen that. I didn't even see Warrior, which is where V for Vendetta and Miracle Man's first suffering. I didn't even see that until many years later. When I did see American comics, superhero comics, I never saw enough of them for a consistent period for them to put the hook in me. And you know what it's like. Comic books are like religion. If they don't get you as a kid, they're probably not going to get you. And so while everyone else was reading superhero comics, I was reading the British War and adventure titles. And that, long story short, is where my interest in war comics and war stories begins. Aged 8, I start reading Battle. It slowly becomes apparent to me that it and other war comics and war movies are based on things that actually happened to people, the things that men and women actually did. And that intrigues and continues to intrigue me in a way that fantasy just can't. Allowing for the obvious hyperbole that's brought to bear on war comics, on all of war fiction, but comics in particular, especially of that era. The notion that these things were actually done in real life grabs hold of me, and I move from comics into reading military history, which is a lifelong interest, and eventually, when I start writing my own comics, the notion of going back and doing my own war comics is never far away.
That's phenomenal. What story took the longest to research?
The thing is, when it comes to research, I've already done most of it anyway, because I've been reading about this my whole life, since I was 8 or 9 anyway. So that's about 40 years. So it's not so much a question of research starting from scratch. It's more like fine tuning.
Okay.
When it's time to write The Punisher in Vietnam again, go back, check
Matterhorn.
that one, but mostly non-fiction, Nam by Mark Baker, If I Die in a Combat Zone, The Things They Carried, A Rumor of War, Dispatches, obviously, novels by Gustav Hasford, like The Phantom Blooper and The Short Timers, just to sort of remind yourself of the lingo, so that you don't stray off message too much. But it's as I say, it's not really a question of research starting from scratch, it's more like fine-tuning.
Did you end up, was it the Nam that you quoted in Preacher, was that oral history, or was that?
Yes, it was. It's just called Nam. I read it in '87. It's by a guy called Mark Baker, and it's just interviews with veterans. I think it had been sparked with the resurgence of interest in Vietnam revolving around the likes of Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, where in the mid-'80s all of a sudden they did go back to looking at Vietnam. I mean, where I first discovered it was actually a strip in Battle called Fighting Man. Colonel older man makes his way around the Vietnam War searching for his missing son. Great artwork by Cam Kennedy.
Who you got to work with?
Who I eventually got to work with. Yeah, that's been one of the nice things.
That's incredible.
Working with artists you loved as a kid. But the weird sense of there being this war, this strange ring-fenced war that America got involved in the 60s, where massive technology and resources are brought to bear on a war in which the deck is stacked against you from the beginning by the way people have chosen to fight it. I'm reading this when I'm 10, so I can't express it in these terms. This is very much with hindsight, but it intrigues me. And then when you see the movies of the era, you see Apocalypse Now and Deer Hunter, and then a little later the ones I mentioned. And by that stage, yes, I have developed a fascination with it.
Oh, that's outstanding. I lost track of my questions, I'm sorry. Whose perspective has been the most gratifying to tell?
Oh boy, I've enjoyed writing about the woman soldiers that Russia put in the line in World War II, the night witches and the snipers, and a couple of others. That's been good because people just don't know that stuff. They don't know that 70, 75 years ago, long before women were accepted in the military the way they are today, you can tell me, have they actually allowed women into combat yet, or is it more a matter of circumstance?
I think it's circumstance, collateral, billet assignments kind of thing. There's still very heavy screening with infantry.
Right.
I can tell you they are sending the best and brightest to the infantry training. It just ends up, it's colossal stuff. If I could pass it, I'd absolutely tip my hat to them in the first place. Not wanting to, and again, the views reflect my own and not the higher agency kind of thing. But I know they're still allowing women the chance to try.
Okay, so in 1942, when the Nazis smashed their way into Russia, everyone goes in the line. Everyone, and women are pilots, they're snipers, they're machine gunners, tank drivers, medics. The one job they don't give them is regular infantry, but a lot of the time it ends up that way anyway. And we're talking about thousands upon thousands of women too. This is this weird little what's become a footnote in history that it should actually be absolutely vital.
Who should we start with, Sara or Anna Kourkova?
Start with both. Read the Night Witches, read Sara.
Has everyone had the opportunity to order Sara from TKO Press yet? Okay, all right, silence is consent, awesome. So, Tactical Knockout, I think, is the name of the company, and they opened up earlier this year.
Oh, is that what that stands for?
I think so. I think so. Total Knockout, something like Tactical Knockout.
I was just thinking it's TKO.
Yeah.
Why not?
And they wanted to do a Netflix-style binging where they completed the entire story, and you could either order 6 individual issues or you could order the trade. And I've done both for Sara. How long was that story in the works?
Not for very long, actually. That was one of those ones that just sprang fully formed.
Wow.
They first approached me, let's see, it came out last Christmas or December, so therefore I was working on it in the latter half of 2017. Yeah, that happened fairly fast. It was just one of those happy coincidences. I was inspired to write this story about a Russian woman sniper and the rest of the women in her squad, and they got Steve Epting on the art, and I'd never worked with Steve. I mean, I'm well aware of his work, but he's mostly done superheroes, and I wondered, how will this work? Will this be okay? Because you're always wondering that the first time you work with a new artist. Sometimes you don't even know who's going to draw the script.
Wow.
But the pages started coming in, and I went from thinking, will he get it? Will this work? To, oh my God. And if that's not the best art I've ever had in one of my stories, it's got to be damn close.
I love the scenery, the backgrounds, the trees.
Yeah.
Just how colossal those worked. I think his wife is his colorist, Elizabeth.
No, she's Betty Breitweiser. No, she's not his wife. She I think they live at opposite ends of the country. But she did a tremendous job on that. And yes, they really made that notion of the Winter War work. battle in the snow, in the woods. No, tremendous.
I love the detail. I love she took a single white sheet of cloth and draped that over a weapon, and I think there was a note of noise discipline at some point in there, and it was totally engrossing. It's phenomenal when you see snipers work together. They're in pairs, and Sara is a solo sniper, and it fits the story so well. It's incredibly intense. It was phenomenal, one and done. You do yourself a disservice by not having ordered it, so I wholeheartedly recommend before you leave the panel to order. I would say order the trade. The 6 issues are lovely. The trade is absolutely more convenient. 6 issues come in a cardboard box. It's a great idea. Just get the trade. I don't work for TKO either.
If you're fans of Brian Vaughan, he says it's the best thing I've ever done. I might agree with him, but yes, I mean the man who writes Saga says that. I'll take that.
That's pretty decent. Anna Kournikova. Am I getting the name right, or is that
Anna
a tennis player?
Kournikova, yeah, I think so.
There's a tennis player, and I'm going to continue going to it from next stop. That was your second story with Russ?
Actually, it was the first thing we did together.
First thing you did together?
Yes, because he, off the back of that, he then started working on the boys.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we'd known each other a long time. I think we met in as far back as '94. And he was working on Animal Man with Jamie Delano and things. And then what happened was, I wasn't living in New York at the time. And he moved to Florida for 8 years. Mm-hmm. And then I think in 2004, when my wife and I made the move to New York permanent, he happened to come back from Florida, and because he was working for Disney, and it wasn't too long after that we started working together. It's just a natural fit, you know. Night Witches is the story of Russia's women combat pilots. The first women to fly in combat. Women were put in a variety of roles and aircraft in the Russian Air Force, but the Night Witches, they flew these terrible little outdated biplanes on night interdiction missions. They were known as the Night Witches. The Germans, who never heard them coming because they got into the habit of cutting their engines before they attacked, because these biplanes made this ridiculous popping noise when the engine's running. So the Germans could hear them coming a mile off, so they got into the habit of gliding to the attack. So you're a German sentry, it's in the middle of the night, it's a perfectly clear, calm night, and the next thing you know, bombs are going off all around you, and you heard nothing coming. So the Germans started calling them Nachthexen, which is night witches, because they seemed to come out of nowhere. The story Russ and I did is basically the story of one of the Night Witches. We created the character, we fictionalized, as I try to do in most of my war stories, we fictionalized real people and events to tell the story of this woman. She starts out as a Night Witch, she becomes a fighter pilot, then in the last storyline she has to deal with the reality of life in Soviet Russia post-war, which is no fun at all.
Absolutely never.
But the last story's called The Fall and Rise of Anna Kournikova, so you can probably guess what happens there.
With Battlefields, was there, because if I remember right, and I'm sorry, I haven't completed all of Battlefields, you did 2 stories with the Tankies?
3.
3 with the Tankies, and then 3 with Anna.
That's right.
Is there any drive to come back to a character like that? It might not be the best word.
I think Anna's story's over, but I think I'll always be writing about those women soldiers, partly because the war on the Eastern Front is so interesting to me, partly because, again, it's an untold story and it deserves to be told. I would like to, I've done a sniper story, the pilot story, I did World of Tanks where I had a woman tank driver, and I would like to do something about the partisans who fought behind the enemy lines. That was a particularly savage period in history, and I would very much like to cover it. So yes, it's something I'm always going to go back to.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think 1943 stands out as a key, or if I want to say Anna and Sara stories were told around that time frame. 42, 43?
Yeah, 42. Anna's story starts in 42 because that's when the Night Witches showed up on the Stalingrad front, and Sara's fighting in Leningrad towards the end of the second year of the siege.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with Dreaming Eagles,
Right.
I think the flashback was roughly around the same time frame with Captain
let's,
Atkinson.
Let's think. The Tuskegee Airmen start training in 42 and end up in Tunisia in 43, and then see out the rest of the war, Tunisia to Sicily to Italy. So yes, it's that sort of midpoint of the war, that turning point of the war.
And of course, that it was issue 6 of Dreaming Eagles was just, I mean, it was beautiful, and at the same time it was horrifying. And with your afterword, you explained that aspect was fictionalized, but it was a real reality.
Oh yeah, for many of the servicemen coming home, yes, they had to face that kind of brutality. That's true.
Can you talk about what it meant to get that story out there?
It was, again, it's one of not exactly an untold story. There's been a couple of movies, and I think if you say Tuskegee Airmen, it will trigger something in people's memories. But yes, it was a story I wanted to tell just because it's an aspect of the war that I think is perhaps under-examined. It was nice to work with Aftershock on that, because I do, frankly, get approached by most comic book companies, and they ask, could I work for them? And you can tell that they're sort of hoping for something Preacher, Punisher. Whereas what I usually have ready to go is a war story. I can do that at the drop of a hat. Whereas if you want something more like what I'm known for, you're gonna have to wait, because those ideas come along more rarely. I mean, for instance, Aftershock, Dreaming Eagles, and then when it occurs, Jimmy's Bastards. It happens like that. And you know, part of it's building a relationship, but part of it's just waiting for the ideas to come along. But it's as I say, the war stories are always there and ready to go. But yes, it was good. It was good to do that one. I think it's an important part of U.S. military history because it kicks so many doors down.
The joke that I had was that Kickstarter was the name of a platform, but you don't want to just help kickstart companies between all the initial stuff out of Aftershock and TKO as well.
Well, I hope they see it like that. keep the brand up there.
But with that, there was one Kickstarter work that you did that I could recall, and that was your kids' book with Rob Stein.
Yeah,
It was Earth. And
yeah.
Rob Stein is a name that I see, especially with all the war story stuff. He's very frequently attached to your projects,
yes.
With letter assignments. But what inspired Earth?
Well, Rob and I go back about 10, 12 years now. We're good pals. Rob is an old friend of Ricky Gervais, and some of you may have seen the series of children's books they did together, Flanimals. Yeah, they're well worth checking out. Rob is one of a number of old friends of Ricky's who, when he hit it big with The Office, he phoned them up and said, hey, I know you haven't heard from me in 15 years, but I've got money now, so if you want to do that thing we always talked about, you know, also Carl Pilkington and people like that. And Rob and Ricky, who had been in a band at one point, I think they actually did that thing where they set fire to a guitar, which almost involved Ricky setting fire to Rob, I think. But yeah, they'd always had this idea for Flanimals, and these children's books are wonderful. They're just weird, invented animals on a weird, invented planet, like a sort of biology book or an ecology book for kids of completely invented animals. Anyway, where Earth came from was knowing that Rob could handle that kind of thing. You know, he has a very sort of grotesque style, and knowing him as well as I did, you know, we drink together twice a week. I just remember having the idea, and this isn't a very satisfactory answer to your question, but sometimes you just have ideas and they have to be used, and it's as simple as that. And it was like, I appear to have thought of a children's book, that's all. I don't have children, I don't like children. But I appear to have thought of a children's book, I must therefore use this idea. Off we go. And Rob, we tried a couple of publishers, and because of something, spoiler alert, that happens in the story, they said, no, can't do that.
Oh.
And that was when Rob had the idea, well, why don't we just do it as a Kickstarter? And I said, why don't you do all the work, and I'll be with you all the way, and it worked out great.
That answers the follow-up question. What was the experience like? Thank you, Rob.
It was great.
With the afterward, to actually another question, but
Sure.
War Stories Volume 1 and 2, they were through Vertigo, and they've been picked up by Avatar.
That's right, yeah.
When they came out, or at least when they were collected in trades, and when I was,
Yeah.
buying all the Garth Ennis trades
Yeah.
that I could find online, they had afterwards where there were 4 short stories, each 40 pages, art with Cam Kennedy in one, and I'm gonna forget everybody else. I'm sorry. Gary,
David Lloyd, Gary Erskine,
Dave
Carlos
Gibbons.
Esquerra, Dave Gibbons did one. That's right. Chris Weston, Cam Kennedy again. Yeah, I was very lucky in those first 8 books.
Each one of those, after 40 pages, you go on to the next story, you hit all 4, and then at the end we've got an afterward. We've got 3 columns of each story breaking down where you took the historical liberties, what you found
Right.
most fascinating.
Right.
And then after that, the recommended reading and 3 to 4 books for
Right.
every story.
Right.
Is that something, and I know with the collection to Dreaming Eagles and afterward was added, that wasn't in the individual issues, and I want to talk more on the U.S. Naval Institute collecting
Right.
Anna's story. You got to do a 14-page afterward in that,
Right.
as well as Russ having about 14 pages of sketchbook
Sketches,
art that he
yeah.
got to share.
Yeah.
Can we get more forwards, more afterwards to your war stuff?
Happy to. I mean, I love doing it. I don't always have the time, don't always have the inclination, but the book from the Naval Institute Press, from their Dead Reckoning imprint, is called The String Bags, and that's about British torpedo bomber crew in World War II. Some of you may have heard of the Hunt for the Bismarck. That's going to be in there. The attack on Taranto, the Channel Dash. Essentially, the British began the war with this terrible-looking biplane called a swordfish. All the other navies had very modern, very capable aircraft. But what they did with this ridiculous museum piece defies description. The thing was nicknamed the String Bag for reasons you'll find out if you read the story, but that will have an afterward. The String Bags will have an afterward. That'll be out in April. Yeah, I do like writing that stuff. It's not always possible, but I would like to. TKO have talked about doing a really nice sort of collector's edition of Sara. If they do,
Hardcover?
I hope so. I'm sure I'll write something for that if that comes up.
No, that'd be phenomenal. The U.S. Naval Institute, excuse me, partnered with Dynamite, made a deal with Dynamite, what have you, to take the 3 parts of Anna, which I don't think by themselves have been collected by
Not all under one cover.
and put them all on one cover, and it's phenomenal. I think they're downstairs. I've not made it to their booth. Have you? Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Gary, the director of USNI is right front and center here.
Yeah, we're 2106.
2106.
So very
Okay.
close to your Dynamite booth.
Outstanding. So you've got Russ and Garth sitting right next to each other. It is a phenomenal story, and it's just it's a beautiful collection. So please make a point to go pick that up and support that. And I know that in talking with Gary, it's less. They're trying to sell more and not collect as many stories, but if presented the opportunity to, no, I'm sorry, you know what I mean. As soon as they can get the numbers out and sell those books, they can continue to do this. They can continue to take your prior stories and recollect them in such a way, reformat them, and give you another opportunity to revisit the work, do another afterward, and all that.
Sure. I mean, it is worth noting that the afterword to the Night Witches trade is actually an amalgamation of the 3 afterwards from the Battlefields books,
Okay,
in
very
which
fun.
Night Witches was originally collected. But yes, I mean, it's everything you need to know about the story. I do feel it's important to acknowledge where I've blended fact with fiction. I do think it's important to say these people did not exist, but people like them did. Real people, real men and women did these things. Here's what I took from reality. Here's where I tweaked it a bit. Here's what I created out of whole cloth. I do want to acknowledge that. I mean, one of the things I've done, I like to do is I don't like to take real people and put words in their mouth. I don't like to ascribe opinions to people that, for all I know, they never felt. Now, I point out in the afterword, The Dreaming Eagles, it's very hard to do that in the case of the Tuskegee Airmen because of Benjamin Davis, who looms over that story like a colossus. What he did, what he put up with, and what he made happen is a vital part of that story, and you can't ignore him. On the other hand, the two fighter pilots that we follow through the story, I think it's fair enough to just create two new characters, because I do not want to, for instance, take Roscoe Brown, who I met, and Lee Archer, and say, on this day, this man said this thing, and he felt this way, because to me there's something vaguely disrespectful about that, to take a real person and ascribe opinions and behaviour to them that may never have been remotely relevant. The same is true of the Night Witches. So there'll always be, the same is true of the String Bags. You'll see real people in the background while fictional characters do most of the action in the foreground, and I will do my best to explain who the real people were, who did the real things.
It's almost like with all this great power you have, you're taking great responsibility, but I promised Brian Cavana I'd crack some horrible joke at some point throughout this, so that's not as bad as,
And we know where that goes.
and that's as bad as it's gonna get, I promise. What are you working on currently? We've got String Bad, and then I heard something about Rat Pack.
Oh, right, yeah, okay, so String Bags comes out in April, I believe. I have a new Punisher book starting next month called Soviet, which harkens back to Russia's unfortunate incursion into Afghanistan, which has a sort of weird relevance for Frank Castle that hadn't occurred to him. I'm doing very short stories, 10-page stories for next year's specials from Rebellion. They're doing specials harkening back to old 70s British comics like Action and Battle, and I'm doing stories for those. These are stories really that I read as a kid and that haven't seen the light of day since the 1980s. Beyond that, I've got a couple of other things in the works that I can't really talk about, including another Punisher, but you'll just have to wait and see when that comes out.
Well, that's, when that one comes out, I can't wait to see more of the, no, never mind, I'm gonna shut up now. How nice is it to work with Jacen Burrows again?
Oh, it's terrific. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Jacen's work, I think it was on a Warren Ellis book. I think it was Deep Blue or Dark Blue, or True Blue. No, it wasn't True Blue. But just amazing artwork, and then we did 303 together, and that led us to Wormwood, and that led us to Crossed, and I think...
Oh, wow. I forgot how much Avatar you guys did together.
Oh yeah, we did a ton of work, and I think that weird little second Cross story set in Scotland, that was the last thing we did together until this Punisher book that's coming out next month. I mean, he's killing it on this. He's doing amazing stuff. Anyone who thinks that they could ever televise or film my work on the Punisher should check out this story, because the stuff in it is, they just couldn't.
Even after Slavers, you say that.
They absolutely, I mean, they could never put Slavers on the screen, and they couldn't put this on the screen either. I mean, you see issue 3, it's the things in it which actually happened to Russian soldiers in Afghanistan, historical fact, are beyond belief.
And that's going for 6 issues?
6 issues, that's right.
That's phenomenal. When it comes to warfare, is there anything that you have yet to talk about that you'd want to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of things. Next year I'm going to start a graphic novel about the Battle of Britain, which is the historical period I'm most interested in. That's something that's probably about 30 years in the making.
Wow.
So Keith Burns and I are going to start work on that next year. Keith drew Out of the Blue, Keith drew Johnny Red and Castles in the Sky for me. And he's in aviation, and so am I. It's funny to think that, you know, we're about the same age, and he grew up in the south of Ireland and I grew up in the north, and we were both addicted to British war comics. And now here we are doing our own.
And he was a student of John's?
I think he was sort of an apprentice. He was his inker. I mean, sometimes Keith just drew the thing. If you're familiar with The Boys, the episodes, the World War II
65.
episodes
Oh, World War II.
in the Battle of the Bulge, and as you say, 65, where the US Air Force takes out all the superheroes. John would just draw the foreground figures, and then he would write tanks or planes, and Keith would go in and just draw them immaculately. And that's, if you're interested, actually, there was a tank battle in Preacher where the Saint of Killers faces off with a squadron or two of M1s, and Steve, who hates drawing hardware, simply left a space and got his brother to draw in all the tanks, that's why they look so good.
John had mentioned that when he got to ink Steve and Tall in the Saddle, Steve hated drawing horses.
Right.
So there'd be a circle, horse, and there's one panel towards the end of that book, and it's with Jesse's on Augustus and fires a revolver in the air, and there's like 14 horses that all just start going crazy, and I just want to see what that proof was, the beautiful, perfected Jesse Custer, and then horse.
I believe that artists generally dislike drawing animals, and horses are particularly difficult. I think it's something to do with the legs, but they hate them.
They mentioned yesterday that Steve hated drawing dogs, and I was like, is that where Dogwelder came from? And no, well, no, I don't know, that's a good one.
I actually, at Steve's memorial drink up back in 2016 in Luton in England, I actually met the guy who first came up with Dogwelder, because, see, it was when I was putting Section 8 together, and I mentioned this to Steve, you know, this team of loser superheroes.
Section 8 is the military classification, unfit for duty, mentally unfit for duty. Yeah, that's perfect.
And Steve said, well, you can have Dogwelder if you want. And the thing is, he didn't actually explain what Dogwelder was. You know, he just said it was something me and a friend came up with years ago. I actually met his friend a couple of years ago, and it turns out that instead of welding dogs to people's faces, as my character does, apparently what, as originally conceived, Dogwelder would slam two dogs together and fuse them somehow, and that was dog welding, and that was how it was originally conceived. So I was like, oh, sorry, I have perverted your noble intention.
Well, you got to homage that at the end of the trade with welding the dog stars. Sure,
That's right.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And that was Alan Moore, actually.
So the book, you dedicated it to Alan and to Ruth,
Yes.
and Russ dedicated it to Steve. I wanted to ask what Alan's input to it was, but now we're going into the world of superheroes, and if you're right with talking
That's
about it.
fine, that's fine, it is. It's all dog welding. I was talking to Alan about the series, because he really enjoyed the Section 8 one. And I was saying, well, we're going to do a follow-up. And I'd kind of like to do Dogwelder's origin as an affectionate satire on the way you did Swamp Thing, you know, where he discovers there's a parliament of trees and all the Swamp Things eventually end
I never
up
put
there.
that together. Oh my God.
And, Alan's a lovely bloke, but it's one of those things that just reminds you that he's a million times more creative than anyone. That you're a sort of idiot pygmy dwarf in his presence. But he says, well, you know that the Egyptian guardian of the underworld, Anubis, had a dog's head. And you know that Sirius, the dog star, is actually a binary star. Ding!
Oh my God.
And we're off to the races, and it's like, thanks, Alan. That's just a throwaway notion to you, two of them, but I'm going to get 6 issues out of it. And that's how that came about.
That's phenomenal. I appreciated the return to see Section 8 again. With the All-Star Section 8, I'll crack the joke because that book now abbreviates to Ass 8.
I should say, by the way, that there is a third series that will never happen without massive fan support. But, I mean, it's all ready to go in here, but it's called Batman I Am Baitor, where Batman and Baitor accidentally swap bodies. So if you...
Start tweeting, Batman,
So if you
I
want
am
that to
Baitor.
happen, get on to DC.
Well, DC's just started a black label where they let people tell stories that we really don't know what the point is. So, I mean, why not use that opportunity to go away and get away with that?
That's a great idea for a comics imprint, isn't it? We don't know what the point is. So fuck it. Black label.
That's, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm shook, that's correct. All right, I don't want to open it up to Q&A, so I'm going to keep asking questions. But we'll probably at 3:30 open it up to fan Q&As because we have people here with Garth Ennis tattooed over their hearts and stuff like that, so it would be horribly selfish.
Or guns.
With I had a note with Out of the Blue, Keith Burns stuff, outstanding. What really moved me about it was taking the main character from Archangel,
Right.
from War Stories, and we've talked about that, but I still want to reiterate it anyway, that the one guy who got a happy ending at the end of War Stories was used again with this. Now with Out of the Blue, was it just printed as those big trades,
Yeah.
those 3 at Ennis
Yeah.
time?
It was actually, that one had a weird history. Yeah, I wanted to do more with Jamie McKenzie because I like a good loser. It's hard,
Oh, yeah.
a loser character, just a shit magnet, is so much fun to write. It actually began about 2010. Karen Berger wanted to do a sort of Vertigo 20 years on or whatever it would have been. And she said, do you have any of your old characters you want to revisit? No doubt thinking Preacher.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I went War Story. And I said, you know, I always wanted to do more with the character from Archangel, and I'm sure she was thinking, well,
What the hell was that? When did you write the X-Men?
and yeah, and anyway, you know, she took what she could get, and not long after that, they cancelled her Vertigo 20-year on whatever it was celebration. I think for Karen that was probably the first inkling that Paul was not well and that she might not be there much longer. And then we got the War Stories back. I took them to Avatar, and I was going to do Out of the Blue for Avatar, and then last few years Avatar have been, shall we say, undergoing a period of restructuring. I think is the bullshit.
That's a very
super
polite
term
way to
for
put it.
that. And then I went to Aftershock, and to be fair, William Christensen at Avatar said, look, you know, if you want this, it's yours, lock, stock, and barrel. I will relinquish all.
Wow.
Well,
How
so,
rare is that?
very, but William and I go back, and he's a good bloke, you know. And I took it to Aftershock, and it was written as 6 issues. You can probably see it if you've read the book. The first book is 3 episodes, the second one is 3 episodes. And
Gorgeous art.
yeah, phenomenal. And Joe Pruitt at Aftershock, who's a smart chap and also always thinks in, or often tries to think in, well, he thinks outside the box. He's very familiar with the European tradition in comics, where they have in France, for instance, they have the bande dessinée, oversized hardcover books that showcase the art beautifully.
Oh, yeah.
And I think also he'd seen Sara. He'd seen that slightly oversized format, and something went ping, and that was why we ended up with those 2 nice hardcovers. And they did surprisingly well for, you know, oversized, pricey-ish hardcovers. They did surprisingly well, which has been very gratifying.
When with my father's passing, we're clearing out his bedroom, and I found the first 2 copies of the first 2 trades of War Stories Volume 1 and 2 that I bought him. And I haven't sat and reread them, but reading Out of the Blue and reading his wife's reaction and how she was singing along through everything, it was beautiful. It's a
Nice.
quick little character moment, and I'd forgotten to ask this, and I'd want to ask this with War Stories 1 and 2, and then when you hit 3, or start doing 3-issue arcs in War Stories 1 and 2, there were always these single burst issues. what's more of a, I guess it's common sense, it's more of a challenge to write a short story 40-pager than do a 3-parter.
Yeah.
But do you see the benefit in, do you prefer to tell a 3-book, a 6-issue kind of story? Is there any benefit to telling a one-and-done story?
It depends entirely on the story. As I say, Jamie had a little more life in it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the war stories I've written, I think you'll agree, have a certain finite quality to them
Yes.
in terms of the characters'
That's
arc.
why I loved hearing about Jamie so much, absolutely.
But you know, that's as much a product of the tone of that story. You know, that there are grim things that happen in Jamie's stories, but you can tell that overall you're going to have a happy-ish ending. Yes, those are short stories. They behave like short stories, and whether it's 50 pages in the original DC format or 66 in the Avatar format, they are and do behave like short stories. And I think that's partly a product of me having so many ideas for war stories and wanting to get around them all. I mean, I'm going to do more. You mentioned that Dead Reckoning, Naval Institute Press, want to reprint some of the older stuff, but also I want to do more new stuff with them.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, and I want to do it for other publishers as well. You know, I'll always be doing that stuff, but because I have so many ideas, yeah, I'm going to jump around quite a bit.
Oh, phenomenal. Let me go the short route stuff, or the quicker questions, and then I can open up the floor. And we've got a mic here, so folks, I've got about 3 quick ones. I'll try and fly through them. The use of the early warning and control system, the AWACS in the Boys 65, I do the Marine Corps equivalent of that stuff, and that blew my mind. And there's nice little Easter eggs when you had all the flight leads check in, call signs, and I think those were all loose tie-ins to characters that you've done and played with before.
No, you're right. Yeah, there's like a preacher leader and things like that.
Preacher leader and
I'd forgotten
Heavy
about
Guns
that.
1 or something.
Yeah.
What does that roll-up sound like now?
I would have to go back and reread it. The bit I like about that scene the most is where the guy who was denied permission to fire on the airliner on 9/11 set has finally he finally understands why, and he's got a chance for some payback, and he says, let's see who takes whose fucking job.
Yeah.
That was the bit I liked.
That 7-year gap was, it's not unbelievable. And that was something that really, like, when it dawned on me that 1 and 2 were the same, that was huge. I'm dead serious. I mentioned this last night, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. When are you going to get a doctorate in history so that we can call you Dr. Ennis?
I don't think anyone's going to be doing that. I have thought about doing a little bit of writing on some of my favorite topics. Steve White, a very talented artist and writer in his own right, who edited Johnny Red, among other things. He is working for a British company that puts together sort of one-shot magazines on different kinds of aircraft. And I thought about maybe writing a couple of text pieces for that. I've been lucky enough to fly in a number of World War II aircraft, and when I'm done, I always write up a little sort of photo essay, which I email around my friends, and I enjoy doing those. So there might be more of that.
You got to do what, a P9, a P4, P40N,
yeah,
and then Santa Killers took you up for your birthday, right?
Run that by me again.
I'm sorry, I thought for your birthday you got to go up in another World War II aviation asset. Someone had, I thought someone from the Preacher cast had taken you up for your birthday.
Oh, no, what it was...
I misunderstood, I'm sorry.
A few years ago, I flew in a Lancaster, which is the British equivalent of the Flying Fortress. And when I met Graham McTavish, who plays the Saint of Killers, he told me that his dad actually flew Lancasters in the war.
Okay.
And I told him that there was a place you could go in Canada and you could fly in one of the only 2 flying Lancasters in the world, and he did it last summer, and he said it was absolutely amazing.
I misunderstood, I thought he took you up.
No. As far as I know, Graham can't fly. No, absolutely lovely bloke, but very interesting to talk to, but I think, amazing though that experience was for me, for him to fly in this aircraft and see what his dad did for a living was a brilliant experience. And it really is stunning I can remember They give us ear protectors before takeoff, and they said if you want to know why we give you these, the pilot's going to run all 4 engines up to maximum horsepower just before takeoff. When you hear them coming up, take the ear protectors off and you'll understand. So we did, and I don't know if you've ever actually experienced noise as pain, where it's so loud it actually hurts and bang, back on go the ear protectors, but yes, that was a singular experience.
And then with that, so you've flown on those aircraft, you took the
Yeah.
pictures, and you've visited some sites.
Yeah, a few.
I wrote it down.
I've been to the Somme, where the British took such horrific casualties in World War One. I've been to a couple of the Normandy beaches, a couple of the inland battlefields, because people think that Normandy was just D-Day, but it wasn't. It was 8 more weeks of horrific carnage. I visited those. I will probably continue to do that. I never really thought of doing that until recently, visiting actual battlefield sites, but it does deliver an insight that you cannot get from books. It's a bit like flying in the aircraft. You don't know how, you know how it is described in a book or whatever, but until you feel it, you don't really understand it.
That's phenomenal. The last question, I know Lisa Wu was working for you. She's moved on. She's her own CEO.
Well, she was working for Aftershock.
She was working for Aftershock?
Yeah.
Well, so she was at my alma mater 4 years before I finished up.
Oh, right,
That's
right,
a
yeah.
real tough place for women to go through, so quite frankly, I think she's hardcore. But
Mhm.
what was it like working with that rock star?
Well, I mean, Lisa wasn't editorial. I worked generally with Joe Pruitt and Mike Martz at Aftershock. I believe Lisa was sort of PR marketing. All I can tell you is she did a tremendous job on anything I worked on.
Outstanding. I really just wanted to get some sound bites saying something about her because I got a lot of respect for her.
Oh, okay.
But with that, it's about 3:34. So who would like to ask Garth a question? Sir, go right ahead.
Sir, besides the Battle of you have a lot of ideas, and besides the work that you're going to do in Battle of Britain, what other bad war themes do you think you would be approaching in the near term?
The ideas that are closest to being ready to go would be the Russian partisan story that I mentioned. I'd like to do a story about the Chindits, who were the British Special Forces who fought behind Japanese lines. I have an idea for a story about a Canadian bomber crew towards the end of World War II. Looking further ahead, I really do feel that the great untold story of World War II is China and what happened there. I think it used to be Russia, but now I think people are vaguely cognizant of the fact that something did happen in the East that utterly dwarfed the Anglo-American contribution in the West. But people just don't know about China because, of course, China went communist right after the war, and all its history was simply withheld from the West. Likewise, the perpetrators, the Japanese, Japan effectively became a vassal state for America, and Douglas MacArthur, who was essentially running Japan as a sort of a warlord after the war, decreed that now that the Japanese are our allies, we don't want recent Japanese history taught in schools. Now his idea was to avoid Japanese people getting any ideas about trying it again, but the effect was that Japanese people do not know that from 1933 to 1945 their soldiers killed 15 million people in China, and that's a figure that some Chinese historians will double. The savagery that was inflicted on the Chinese in those 12 years is unimaginable. I mean, I think that's beyond the Holocaust. That's twice the Holocaust.
Jesus.
And yet no one knows. It was China's own catastrophe. It was their Holocaust, and the perpetrators got clean away. I would like to understand more about that, and I'd like to write more about that too.
That's huge. Back left and then back right. Yes?
Yes, I wanted to ask, while you were working with different publishers, like with Dynamite, or with Marvel, or with Vertigo, did you find anything difficult about working in between the two, or any nuances when you were doing either like Hellblazer or?
Gossip.
Oh, sure. There's always those differences. I mean, I do it because I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket. I go back to DC because they have the Hitman characters, the Section 8 characters. I go back to Marvel because they have the Punisher and they have Nick Fury. And they're all happy for me to do my own particular takes on those characters. If you're looking for nuances, differences between them, I mean, I can tell you that DC were a little more heavy-handed when it came to censorship.
Vomiting on Batman, what?
Well, but to me that's understandable because that's their flagship character and their
Figure of
their
respect.
one. Yeah, I think the Batman editor. I should explain that in the first issue of Hitman, Batman punches our hero in the stomach and he throws up on Batman, and as originally drawn it was right here all over the bat signal. But as actually published, he honks on his feet. You don't actually see the results, you just see Batman punch him through the ceiling. And the Batman editor at the time said, that's adding insult to injury, and that's why. But now contrast that with Marvel, and in particular Max, where I can do almost anything I want. As for the independence, it is total creative freedom, and I wouldn't go to anyone to any company where that wasn't the case. I suppose I've probably encountered censorship at Vertigo doing the Preacher letter column more than anywhere else, because that for some reason they felt that if it's the letter column, it's kind of the voice of the company, even though it's me, it's got my name at the end of it. So they were very antsy about that, but hell, it's a letter column, so who cares?
And then gentleman in glasses, go ahead. You, yes.
I just wanted to say that, like, I would never have read any war comics. I started with superhero comics when I was young, and I think it was your combination of wit and grit that really, like, led me from your superhero mainstream things into the war stories, which I think are amazing. But I wanted to ask
Thank you.
if you could just talk about what appeals to you about the Punisher character, if it's the military aspect or something.
The military aspect helps because, of course, it allows me to go back and tell Vietnam stories.
Awesome Vietnam stories.
Thank you. I think it's the sheer simplicity of the character. They killed his family, so now he kills criminals. That's it. What's easier to understand than that? It helps also that Frank reminds me of the characters I read as a kid. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 2000 AD characters like Judge Dredd, and I'm sure if I mention others like Strontium Dog or Robo Hunter or Road Trooper, you're going to start to lose it a bit. But those characters who what do we call them, gunfighters, as opposed to superheroes, they're just ordinary guys, more or less. But they shoot people rather than zap them with power beams or magic them off the planet or whatever. And I suppose Frank, being just a regular guy who uses guns, it helps me to relate to Frank in that way, because I remember these are the characters that I read in comics and watched in movies as a kid, and these are the characters I liked best. Magic people who do magic things, well, the further you get into fantasy, the more I lose interest. The Punisher is one of those rare mainstream characters where you can write stories set more or less in the real world, if you so choose. Another one is Nick Fury, another one is John Constantine. That helps enormously.
Gentleman in the back, and then we'll come to you. Go ahead, class. Yeah.
Has there
You mean on TV or movie? Yeah, you know, there's been interest in just about everything I've done at one point or another, but as you know, only 2 of them have gotten really serious. I mean, a few things, war stories or not, have had their options actually sold, but only The Boys and Preacher have gone the whole way. So yes, you know, Hollywood's always looking. Sometimes I get asked that question, you know, did you ever imagine that your comic would be on the screen? Could you possibly have imagined that? And I said, well, and what you're supposed to say is, no, I couldn't have imagined it, and I consider myself blessed. But the truth is that given Hollywood's voracious appetite for product, yes, of course, they've looked at everything at some point. Yes, of course I could imagine it. So yes, there's been interest, but you know, it's not real till someone puts money behind it.
That's valid. And then right behind the microphone, or the camera, excuse me. Yeah.
Hi, Garth.
Hi.
Just want to ask, are there any genres that you like to do work in, but you cannot because of market reality? Just the fact that the market does not.
You know, it's not really so much a question of genre as particular stories. I mean, I am not a big sword and sorcery fan. There's something silly about that genre. That said, I loved The Hobbit as a kid, and I love it now. I think it's tremendous. To me, it's storytelling 101. However, were I to be given the chance to write the 1980 British fantasy classic Hawk the Slayer, which I think is really the final word in sword and sorcery, I would leap at that opportunity. I really would. Jack Palance at his best. He just chews up great swathes of scenery. It's amazing. So were someone to get the rights to that, I could do them a nice comic book sequel.
Yeah, outstanding. We'll do one more. Allison.
If you look at everything that you've done over the years,
Mhm.
obviously, you know, you started writing as a much younger man.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you're a different person now than you were when you wrote some of those stories. Are there any stories in your canon that you still feel and will always, you know, at least right now, think you'll always feel are the most autobiographical?
Or autobiographical, but there's very little of that. I mean, every character you create has a little bit of yourself in them, but there's very few that I would actually point to as being autobiographical. I mean, Tommy Monaghan, to an extent, in that he would just